got to know your side of the a little bit by what you liked in the back and forth that I had with that other person. I forgot her name, Superhumanity. Um, so so it seemed like based on the things that you were liking, uh, the statements about DEI in defense of DEI were in my opinion divorced from objective truth. And so, like as far as whether or not DI is racist, whether or not DI is racially discriminatory, which the other person finally admitted, by the way, but then it just became a question of, oh, is this racial discrimination actually bad? You know,
Well,
and
isn't that kind of what the question? Isn't that what the question is, right? Because and it kind of so we're getting somewhere, okay? But let me pause right here at this place. All right, so you're actually implicating exactly what I was talking about. This whole discussion you've just had implicates exactly what I was talking about, but you haven't kind of like addressed what I said. So I'm going to bring it up
okay,
again and try to draw some
got it.
connections for you, okay? Now, you had
Okay,
mentioned that you really appreciate the scientific process. You really appreciate like experimentation and investigation of hypotheses and using data, analyzing that to like come to conclusions. And like that's, the thing, right? So for me, I'm a math person. I'll tell you guys, the audience, you guys could get a sneak peek of where I'm going in this conversation if you want. Maybe that'll be interesting to people. But obviously, he's talking about the scientific method being very scientific in the way he goes about discovering information. But like, he actually didn't use that process in order to come to his conclusions about race. He doesn't seem to realize that. And so the next step is to get to talk about, problem solving in general and what the first step in problem solving is and investigation should be. And that's the identification stage. And I'm going to try to get him to realize that he hasn't done that part. He hasn't identified what the problem of racism. Um, he's kind of accepted someone else's identification of it, and we're going to try to get him to understand who he accepted and why that source might not be the best source. I don't know if this tactic is going to work, but see if we can get him down that path. You have your background of really being interested in scientific investigation and logical thinking, using data to come to your conclusions. And what you were saying is that you feel like that process is absent from people who are woke, which maybe we can say that it's people who are often advocating for anti-racism. Would that
sure.
be right? Okay. So, and then so I guess what I was going to do is kind of pull you back to what I said earlier, okay? Which is
Yeah,
that I guess the best way to say it is that when you go to solve a problem, right? What's the first step in solving any problem? Just general in problem solving. I teach problem solving, so like I'm your teacher right now. What's the first step in problem solving?
well, from an IT perspective, like you have to understand what the problem is first.
Period. That's the first step.
Yeah,
Exactly. It's
yeah,
identification.
yeah,
Identification. And it's not just in IT. It's literally no matter what problem you are dealing with or trying to
correct,
solve, if you don't identify it, you will not solve it. Okay? And that's
correct.
why it's the first step in problem solving. So, listen, that step, if you do it wrong, are you able to find a solution to the problem?
No,
No,
absolutely not.
it will not occur. Okay? So, this is one of the complications that exists in the race context. Okay? Because for generations now, the majority of Americans have not been able to accurately identify the problem of racism. And part of the reason they're not able to accurately identify the problem of racism is because of what I said earlier, which is that race is not taught anywhere. Race is not, like the history of race is not taught anywhere. The history and the mechanisms of white supremacy and how it operated in the past and how it continues through to the present is not taught anywhere. So, like, all of these things that have a significant influence on how our society operates and was integrated into our society through generations, a lot of people are completely unaware of it, even though it's having a substantial impact on people's lives all the time. And so, the people for who are experiencing those consequences, they are not, it's not really possible for them to be ignorant of what's going on because they're literally experiencing all the negative consequences of a toxic racial environment. Those would be racialized black people, for example. And so racialized white people, on the other hand, or people who, are on various levels of the racial hierarchy, which I'll bring up and talk about again, they don't experience those consequences because that's how the system was built, is so that some people would experience negative consequences while other people would not experience them. That's literally what white supremacy was. It was a ranking that would create that outcome and that consequence. And so I think a lot of people don't really know the origins of that system, nor the mechanisms of the system, nor whether those mechanisms are still in play or not, and if they are, how they operate and what impacts they have. I think that entire universe of thought for the vast majority of Americans doesn't even exist. So under that scenario, it's going to be very difficult for people to have a cognizant and reasonable thought universe on this subject matter when the information has to actually be like sought after and found. There's no way to latently understand it and get the truth of racism, in my opinion.